Hi, welcome to Quiet Before. I am really excited to have two great friends to talk about their partnership and collaboration. We're going to just get right into it and ask you both to introduce yourselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Lu Zhang. I'm an artist, visual artist that work in medium, in video and ceramic, and I also teach at the ceramic studio. And I run Chinatown Basketball Club with Herb Tam together.
And I'm Tam. I'm the several things like curator at the Museum of Chinese in America and an artist as well. Although I use that term like hesitatingly, but yeah, I do make art sometimes. And yeah, I also co-organize Chinatown Basketball Club.
I've known her since 2003
Probably, yeah,
when we
yeah.
first started working at Asia Society. And then I met Lou when you and Lou met when we were at Mocha together. Do one of you want to maybe say how you met? Because you're married,
Yeah.
which
We met because I was working on an exhibition at Mocha about Chinese food. And at that point, we decided, curatorial team decided to like create an installation that was kind of inspired by Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, which is like this seminal feminist piece in which they're big, involves a big table with table settings for different women, mythical and real, throughout history that Judy Chicago wanted to sort of memorialize. Because of that, we decided, okay, we need ceramics to be made for our installation. So I asked a bunch of different people, for recommendations and did a lot of kind of legwork to find ceramic artists in like our community that we could work with. And my good friend Corey, I asked him and he recommended one of his students, Lou. That's how we met. I did a studio visit and then we kind of like worked together for this show along with another artist. And kind of after that, then like the kind of romance started.
can you share maybe what your thoughts were when you first saw Lou's work, when you did your studio visit?
There was like a lot going on in the studio. There was like functional ceramics, bowls, cups that I really liked, and then figurative work. Much of it like very kind of self-portraiture in a way, or representations of not just her body, but like mental states, psychological states. I felt like, and kind of like personal history stuff. What I was drawn to most of all was just like the kind of experimental mentality or kind of willingness to like play around with the medium, which is I think the main thing like we're looking for with the artist is like not somebody who's just like rigidly stuck on like a way to do ceramics that they control really well and like know really well. We wanted artists that could take risks, and I felt like Lou had that. And she had also like a certain mastery of it, even at that time, that I felt like she has like a kind of risk-taking nature and also like a control of the medium.
Were you fairly familiar with ceramic artists? Where was Lou in terms of your understanding of ceramics as an art?
I had been really into ceramics for a long time. The tactile quality of the surfaces and the interesting ways that glazes could form and kind of weird colors, marbleizations. I knew some of the really important like historical ceramic artists or something in America, but I didn't really know much. And for the show, I just, started to research specifically like Asian American, Chinese American ceramic artists throughout the country. And I was trying to pay attention to who was who and who was doing what. And I had a pretty good knowledge of ceramic artists making work in New York from like the Asian American community in 2000 and like 2012 or
15.
something. Or no, 2015, yeah. So it's actually very like narrow.
So, Lou, when you met Herb, when he came to visit your studio and you started to get to know him,
Mhm.
what were your impressions of his curatorial vision for the show
Mm.
and as a whole while you were getting to know him?
I think I felt lucky to be included for this show, and I learned a lot through the process. And I think it's pretty heavily influenced by the research behind the food show. My first impression of meeting Herb, I just remembered he came to a studio visit in the summertime, and then he wear basketball shorts and was a socks that's very long, and then was a baseball cap. And I was like, wow, this is how curator look like. It's very different. So I had an impression. And then I think we ran into each other half a year later on a train. And then I didn't recognize her because I think he was going to work. So he dressed up suit like a work pants, but with a basketball shoes. So that caught my eye again, but I didn't look up like who that person is. And then when he was getting off the train, he waved at me, and that's when we reconnected and then started picking up the conversation after the studio visit. So two times I just had there is some basketball elements going on that captured my attention. So that was maybe like my impression towards to Herb as a person. After we started working on the show, like Herb said, I had a pretty personal approach through ceramics into my personal stories. But working on this show, I had the openness to allow things to happen, and especially working as a commission work. And I want to look into the chef's personal story, the original stories. So there's a lot more density put into the research, not simply just when I make ceramic, there's an idea and I work on it. There's so much more interviews behind this food research trip. And I learned a lot. For example, Genesu chicken, this dish, I always thought is a Chinese American dish, but the root is actually from Hunan and traveled to Taiwan and then came to American. Also, in terms of food, there is like this adaptation that kind of adapt to material where you are and then growing like that. So I see a lot of parallels between the material and the story of ceramic actually also, because I started teaching Chinese ceramic history during pandemic online. I really like how each dynasty kind of change a location and they adapt material, they adapt technique along the way. And that's how the form changes, color changes, the taste of the food changes. So I really like see, wow, there's actually a lot more connections between ceramic and food after working on this show.
When did you first start to know Herb as an artist, as a painter?
I've always felt Herb is an artist in terms of how he see things, how he approach things. We talked about how artists would just see things and feel things, and they would pay attention on things that people wouldn't pay attention. I think especially painters, when they look at things, light matters, composition matters, color matters. And I think a lot of just every day from the everydayness, and I've noticed that Herb always has those observations around. It's just very sensitive in terms of looking.
I've known Herb for a really long time, and I think that I had, the awareness that he was a painter. And I agree, Lou, the way he looks at the world is very much an artist's perspective. But it wasn't until many years later that he actually showed some of us his paintings. It's such a big part of who he is. Is there anything that you want to share about him as a painter?
When I actually first time moved in, there is one bedroom that just has piles of painting and it's very large scale. And then I asked her, what are those paintings? His attitude towards to that is really, he's like, he wants to hide it. He's like, oh, that's nothing. Like, don't even bother to look at it. And then I looked through a lot of them and I was like, wow, those are amazing works. And then so we made a plan just each year. We will look into his painting and pick either one or two and then change our like room decoration. So in a way, we're looking at his painting in different sequence, like with a curatorial mind behind it. So then we've been doing that since. There's many different painting kind of come through, and every time I brought out a painting, Herb would explain how he made it, what he was saying, thinking, and then whether he was at like a peak of reaching to like a certain subject, like he was into the nightlife scene, and then the car, like the vision that as looking out the world through car flashes, and then like a different time, and there's a period that he's very specific about detail, and then he portraits people that's very specific. And I think from that period, he actually had 10 books that he collects, newspaper from the past, cutouts. There's many images from that. And I think he treated that part of the collection as like a treasure, like the newspapers from the 90s to 2000. And then one period of his painting was just painting newspaper images from that. So there's many, many years of practice that he just hides it. And then we're kind of revealing it slowly. And then I guess making Herb to kind of relook at it slowly too.
So if we can jump forward to the pandemic, where you were in your relationship, and then if you can talk about Painting Club.
Lu had just moved into a new studio in Ridgewood. Before, she had a studio in Bushwick at this huge, massive kind of warehouse building that a lot of artists know called 1717 Trowman. And her space there had like zero, natural light. It had very little like ventilation and stuff. But just before the pandemic, she moved into this new studio in this kind of small building with some other artists, just like a handful of other artists, including Trisha Baga, who they had befriended because Lu works at a ceramic studio, Greenwich House Pottery, and Trisha kind of was like had a residency there. So they met, and just so happened like right before the pandemic, moved into this Ridgewood studio. And then the pandemic happened. Like everybody, we were suddenly, had a lot of unstructured time. People were really like confused about what, as an institution, we should be doing. It was just a lot of flailing around. There wasn't a lot of sort of expectation, also like just the unpredictability of our lives, just trying to understand like what was dangerous or not, what could still be possible, what was the future. And we started to think about artists in our community. We should check on people or something. Then it turned to like wanting to do Instagram studio visits. Do you remember like how that happened?
I think it came from like a personal feeling because of how I was able to move right before the pandemic from this big Trotman building to the smaller studio community. During pandemic, it's crucial because in a bigger community of the building, as an artist, you don't have access to your studio, access to the material. Like some other friends can go to their stone carving studio. My ceramic studio was completely shut down for at least 3 to 5 months. I was working part-time in the admin office, and I don't need to go in anymore. So there's just like sudden cut of everything. It makes me feel lost, but I'm also wondering about how friends are doing, how everybody is dealing with this, and what material that they're working with. How can they handle their, if there is no space to work, and what are they doing? What are they thinking? Maybe the voices like kind of came out from that wonder.
Can you actually describe what the program was? Because it was a multi-step process for the three of you.
It came in different steps. It was a conversation between Herb and me first in terms of the studio visit. We wanted to do an Instagram live, and then we call it virtual studio visit loop. And then Herb was like, tell me why there is a loop. I explained to Herb, I said, because I thought this is not a thing that we're doing to others. Others can do it to others, like the friends can be checking on each other through either public forms or personal forms. So it's a studio visit loop that could happen, just expanding that. So we had a conversation about doing this, and then Herb started making a poster for this virtual studio loop. The initial poster was made by a pencil drawing by Herb, and then we just like thought, okay, we should follow this format. We make a poster for each studio visit. So then while we were making the first painting for the first visit, I think it was a second visit was Ko Lu, artist Ko Lu. And then we were struggling with his cat, one of his cat. The eye couldn't make it right. And that's when Trisha started coming in. Trisha's like, oh, I can handle this. So then we figure out this new format of working is 3 people working on this one poster painting, and then take turns, and then we can help each other or go on top of each other. And then it's almost like a silent negotiating by painting on top of each other. So then in that way, we really like discovered something new from this process, and we really enjoyed it. And that's how we call ourselves Painting Club. So since then, Painting Club started making painting posters for the virtual studio visit loop. We did, I think, over 30 studio visits and made 30 paintings over 3 to 4 months period. Nancy was one of the guests.
Is there a portfolio online?
We posted on our Instagram, and then we
Yeah.
archived some of the studio visits.
What I think is so magical is how you made those posters. Can you talk a little bit about where you were getting the information to make the poster for each person?
After a while, we decided, okay, these are basically portraits of people. And we just kind of organically went to people's Instagram pages. All the people that we did visits with, like you, we consider them friends of ours. And so we sometimes just had photos already, but mostly we went to their Instagram and kind of searched for images of like their family members or weird things that we knew about them that they were like obsessed with. So it could be like pets, or it could have something to do with like related to their cultural identity. And then we kind of, among the three of us, just discussed a rough composition or things we definitely wanted to like bring into the painting, and kind of negotiated, just had a conversation about like how we should start. But it will often involve not images of these people like our subjects, but more like the things around them. We just kind of started that way, and sometimes things would get like erased or morphed into something else, or the whole painting process would take over, and we would sort of abandon ideas that we had in the beginning in favor of something else. But yeah, the source images really came from like people's sort of personal like lives and kind of what they chose to share.
How long would it take you to do each painting?
I think it felt different, but it felt there's always a deadline because of the virtual studio visit loop is happening. So maybe like around 3 days would be the rough time. In the beginning, we painted acrylic most of the paintings, so it could be faster. And then later on, painting club started discovering like oil mediums, and it paints slower, and then it has like a multiple sessions. And it just during the pandemic, because of there's nothing else that you feel you can grab onto, and then we felt making one painting together with a deadline really is the structure of our day. And we would paint in the studio until 5 a.m. and then
Wow.
we drive home. Yeah, and then not talking to anyone, just paint 3 days in a row, and then just go home, sleep, eat, and come back to studio, keep painting. And then we look at the time during that period, it was really magical. Like now we're all become busy and then into our own projects. And when we paint, it's always has to like schedule a time, and then we meet once in a while. So it's never feels like during that time, just paint every day, every night, just eat and paint. That's what we did.
That sounds, I mean, like the best way to
Yeah.
take care of yourself as an artist. We were talking about Herb including you in the initial Mocha exhibit, and Lu, you saying that that was probably the first time you were collaborating. But this painting club and virtual studio loop was sort of a more like concrete way of collaborating as curators, as artists, and also as activists, as community builders. Did that make you start thinking about other things that you wanted to do together? Were you surprised by how well you worked together? Or was it really just very natural and not, not that much of a revelation?
Working together for the like VSV loop and the painting club was very organic, I would say. We didn't strategize it at all. It was just, let's just do this, let's just try it out kind of attitude. The process, it was not easy. Yeah, it was not smooth all the time. Collaborations just creatively for some people, it's like naturally difficult, I'm not used to like collaborating as an artist. Sometimes like I'll have a certain like idea of how to do something that I just like think is a given, and then I'll just proceed that way, not knowing that Lu might not be down with that, or it might be somehow like stepping on her toes or something. Even like doing the interviews sometimes, doing the studio visits, I just have a certain style of talking to people in a platform like interviews or something that are public. I have questions. There's a sort of progression of a logic of how that should go or something. I just kind of follow that. Lu had a more kind of organic sense of how to structure those kinds of conversations following a certain thread. And I was more like the next question, and it would just completely change subjects. For example, painting club too. It wasn't all easygoing stuff. It mirrored, I think, like the internal thing of if you're an individual artist, no matter what you're doing, like a writer, a painter, you kind of have these negotiations with yourself about what you should do before you actually do it. I felt like it was like that with our dynamic between the three of us. Ultimately, it was just like it felt like it made me feel like alive doing all of this, to be challenged, I guess, in how I usually would go about doing all of these things, was very like invigorating.
I would totally agree. It wasn't easy or natural, or it didn't follow any plan that things happen. I think the thought of doing something together was organic, but doing it was a struggle. What's beautiful about this process is we stayed with the struggle. It wasn't like, oh, I felt comfortable doing this with you, and I'm just gonna do it on my own. And I think a lot of artists has a choice when they do that. When they face a struggle, like a lot of times, it's like Herb said, struggles on their own. That process that they're fighting with their own doubts and own confusions together. But in this painting club collaboration, it was almost like a silent negotiation with each other. We wouldn't say, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. But someone did something, the person look at this whole picture and then did not agree, would go over, change something, adjust something, adding something. There's a ways of saying no. And so in this painting process, it is all different kinds of ways of saying I prefer the other way. So I felt this willing to push something to a certain direction with negotiations and with disagreement of each other in terms of doing community organizing work. That is like collaboration. Like not everybody has the same idea all the time. So like how do you negotiate that and then still going forward to the goal that you have all together is, I think, what's the most beautiful part. And I see the most valuable almost manner that we learned from this process, or I learned from this process, is giving up sometimes, like about what you insist and then listen to what others are trying to express, giving up your own ego, giving up your routine. We all have ways of painting. I would think about how Herb was keep telling us about when he was painting, he would be so detailed about certain things and then just makes him really exhausted after painting. But because of painting club, we would come in and then challenge him on that. Like he painted so carefully, and then we would go over it with very few brushstrokes, and then he's like, "Oh, it's gone." So then he had to learn to give up on that specifics. But then his brushstroke still maintains his personality, and then there's that learn to adapt to each other's way of working is also a beautiful process.
That's brutal.
I learned so much from painting club, but also from the interviews, with the artists. Even talking to you, Nancy, about poetry, the poetry scene, the slam scene in New York. It was very inspiring, feeling like we were part of this really important history that we also participated in and contributed to. Felt really good. And then with painting, just learning to like give up control was great. I think it made me a much better painter. I feel like much more liberated from my own constraints. I always felt like I had these like handcuffs or something. I was painting with handcuffs, and now like I don't have those anymore, which is so cool.
Are you painting more since then?
Yeah, I find little crevices of time to like knock something out. I paint a lot faster too.
I would say you painted more compared to before pandemic. If he has some time, he'll be like, "Oh, I'll start a painting." Not for anything, just oh, I want to just get into it, get into the pace, and look at certain colors differently. Almost like a small little task that he would do when he has time.
I think that the interviews that you did are an important record of that time. I think, of course, three people painting one painting. Of course, that's going to be a brutal process, but the painting that you did for my conversation, it was literally magical what you chose to pull from my Instagram and also, what you decided about the content and composition, you ended up drawing out a lot of people who had passed from my life, like loved ones who'd passed. And I don't think that you entirely like knew all the stories, but it was as if something was guiding your painting. And I guess the way you're describing it is in line with it being alchemy. Can we talk about the exhibition that you both did in Queens, when that happened, and if you can just sort of introduce how you came up with the idea and what it was?
The exhibition, it was called Homeostasis, Life and Livelihoods in Flushing. And it happened in a mini mall in Flushing, right next to the big Flushing library last summer 2023. The kind of story of how we decided to do an exhibition there goes back to kind of like the early pandemic when Lu was documenting Flushing, our neighborhood. She's really interested in like the mini malls that are scattered around Flushing and the kind of like local community that it served in really specific ways. And we went into this mall that we did the show in. It's called Rongxin Plaza, which seems like a grand name, but like in fact, it's one hallway on either side. There's small shops, one that sells like very discounted phone plans. There's like a butcher that sells really good like fresh meat. There's a barber shop. There's somebody selling like vitamins, and also that same vitamin seller ships vitamins that he sells like back to China, or ships whatever else you want back to China. There used to be like a remittance service, where you can send money back to China. Probably most people would be sending money back to China. And we noticed like in the back, there's like a 99-cent store. So we went into this mini mall as Lu was filming in Flushing and noticed that there are all these like slips of paper just taped onto the glass walls on the exterior and interior, and it was all in Chinese, so I couldn't really read it. And then Lou was like, "Oh yeah, those are ads for houses or apartments, spaces, sometimes a bed for people like looking for a place to live." It was clear that each business, and we talked to one of the business owners about it, and she was like, "Yeah, we just rent our kind of glass exterior walls to like people who want to post these ads." And they were just throughout the mall. I remember when we first saw it, or maybe the second time we went in there, we were kind of both like, we should do a show here. Lou asked, how much is it? And I can't remember the figure, but I remember thinking, wow, this is ridiculously cheap for like a piece of real estate. You could do like a cool show, because like it's clear that immigrants go there, people that live around here, they go there, they get all their essentials and stuff, and people go in there to find a place to live. And there's this kind of like attention on the things in that mall that are very different than say like an art gallery or a museum, or even like if you go into Target, maybe it's the awareness of things around you felt very different than in Rongxin Plaza.
I was actually not thinking of making any particular piece. I was just filming around and then collecting materials. The footage for this particular short documentary was shot in between 2019 to 2021. And then when I was filming, pandemic happened. And then also the same, like there's nowhere to go. So I would just walk around on the street all the time in Flushing. And I've noticed a lot of small business closed, and then a lot of the mini malls started appearing. They're like a little community of clustered a little business together. And then those mini mall to me is particularly special because when I left China, it was 2012. So I grew up between the 90s and 2000 in China. And those malls often appears in a second tier or third tier country, and then in a mostly rural area. Nowadays, you go to China, most of the malls are bigger, scaled, and more organized. It's never like too much of a characteristic mall like from the 90s. And I've noticed that Flushing adapted those aesthetic of those malls, and then you would still see malls like only has one storage, malls only one storage with a basement, and it took up a lot of space, but it's not the tall building. And then as I was documenting during this period, I've noticed that Flushing also started having a lot of modern malls that has multiple storage growing up. So because of that, we kind of noticed this Rongxin Plaza as one of the really special one. One thing, like Herb mentioned, that we noticed there's a lot of advertisement. So during the pandemic, the mall was closed. All the business, their store, there's a closed store used to be. The doors are always closed, but the mall is open. There's always a lot of people standing in the hallway looking up at those advertisements. So I was like, the business is closed, but the mall is still activating. There is something, special about as like a space that they're individualized, but there also has like this mutual sharing hallway that they share all those ads. And then even the mall is closed and the people still have access to. So because of we noticed the people were looking, the audience already there and the perspective already exists. All we need to do is to have something for them to look at. And then so we started talking about this exhibition. Herb mentioned about showing artworks in the museum or showing artworks in the public. In my personal practice, I care that a lot. And I often think about terms like social aesthetic or participatory projects or community-based projects. But I think it's hard for me to kind of mention what I do can be pinned down by one particular terms. So far, I'm still kind of thinking I'm touch up on a little bit, but each time is different. The film that we mentioned about eventually showed at one of the Flushing dim sum restaurant. So it was a document of the mall, and it showed at the mall. So this work process kind of continued with me and Herb's curatorial idea of pursuing to do a show at the mall.
The exhibition had great coverage in the New York Times, like that beautiful article that they wrote. And that was such a great picture of you with the artists. Was that in a part of the mall?
It was in the hallway of the mall, so where the exhibit is.
Part of the article talked about how some of the shopkeepers responded to the artworks. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what some of the relationships between the artworks you chose, how they related to the business that they were exhibited in? And also, if you could share some of the community response to the work.
We were really careful because thinking about hanging artworks in the mall, we were concerned about what kind of art would be serving for the audience over there. How much would we care whether they would pay attention or not? So we had a lot of conversation between that. We eventually choose to work with artists who has existing relationship with Flushing, who either was born in Flushing or grew up going to Flushing, or newly emigrated but live around Flushing or choose to come to Flushing for their daily grocery. So there's either like a really close tie relationship or a little far distance of, but there's always a relationship between the artist and the Flushing community. When we approached the vendors, Herb was always around, but because most of them speaks only Mandarin, so I would go to them and explain what we're doing rather than, okay, we're just going to rent a space and put up artworks and we don't care how they think. So we went to each one and then talked to them about our idea. We wanted to do a show, and then it's all the artists that from the local community. And we would specifically explain what kind of artwork we will hang on their window. And then some of them gave us really like a warm response, and they're really supportive. Two vendors, the beauty supply and the barber shop, they both had an artist in their family. One grandma is making paper cut. So she's really open. She's like, oh, I love this idea and please do it. And then she gave us a lot discount, and then she like just would willing, and she wants to give us like a better location for the ads as well. And then the barbershop's daughter makes oil painting. And from her perspective, I don't really understand what she's doing, but I guess what you guys is doing are the same as what she's doing. So she started come to realize her relationship with her daughters, willing to make art through this show. And then with other vendors, like there's a medium kind of response, meaning they're like, okay, I don't get what you're doing, but I guess it's okay. And then there's also one vendor just doesn't care at all. It's like, okay, you can just use this place. Throughout the process, they showed a lot of support because things get to move around from the public, and then works get missing. There was one artwork in the beginning by Xueli Wang. Her work just kind of went missing in the first week, and but then that piece was a letter that's written just on an A4 paper as like the ads, and then ask mom, have you eaten? And then it went missing. So that is another interesting thing that we talked to the artist too. We were like, okay, so the nature of the show is in a public space. Anything could happen to the artwork. We have this conversation with the artist, and then all of them kind of didn't want to go ambitious scale of artwork. A lot of them choose to work with A4 size or A4 paper material. I think that was like a really careful consideration from both sides, I think.
Everything was like a new work. We asked artists to like respond to the space, and everything was sort of hung in the central hallway, which is essentially public space. But we did rent the glass real estate from each vendor, and like Lou said, we did show them like what we wanted to like include. There was some work that was very much placed like on those walls along with the posts for spaces for rent, and meant to like kind of disrupt flow of people looking at those ads, like to include something like very different. So like one artist, Shirley Wang, she included texts written in Chinese that were very different than like these ads. They were instead like more very personal, highly intimate. One said like, "Mom, have you eaten yet?" Another one said, "You're the one I love the most," I think, something like that, based on a song lyric. All the art was really meant for the people who go there regularly, to kind of make them see the space differently, hopefully. So a lot of people, I think, just weren't even aware there was artwork, but the intention was for the work to really speak to people who are really like looking for home. Yeah, it was really refreshing, I think, for us to work that way, to think about an art audience in a very different way, and to like build these connections with our own neighborhood that we didn't have before, and to like learn about Flushing in a different way, to think about the history of the place and kind of where it's going, using like the mall as a kind of microcosm. I think we learned a lot, and I think that's maybe part of what is really great about collaborating with Lou, is like learning about either like our community, whether that's like a location like Flushing, or like the people around us, and also just like a way of working that's very different than how we might work as like individuals.
It really like references back to how you first met and what Herb was looking for in terms of an artist to be part of the exhibition, and your like fluidity, Lou. I think that that's really evident in the progression of your work together, that it's this combination of like structure and subconscious. That's really beautiful. Again, the painting that you did for my interview, it feels like a very clear aesthetic that comes from your chemistry together. And Trisha, of course, that leads us to Chinatown Basketball Club, which again I think is interesting because the first thing that Lou started off talking about was observing that you came to her studio. And were you going to play basketball that day? Is that why you were dressed like that?
No, but like growing up, I just always played basketball, or I always played some sports, and so I always dressed to be ready to play sports, and specifically basketball. I remember like in California, I would going to college, high school, and college. Like I always had shorts on underneath pants, and I always had shoes that I could hoop in. I'm not like that now. Like I don't have like shorts underneath, dress pants. It was summer. I mean, it was like really hot. I remember that day, and all my shorts were like basically basketball shorts. Chinatown Basketball Club, it's like the ultimate collaboration. Blue and I both grew up obsessed with basketball, playing it and being obsessed with like the culture around it, like what people wore, the music that was associated with it, anime, and we just played all the time. And then when we got together, it was something we shared. We both grew up loving Jason Kidd, also LeBron James, big LeBron James fans, and so we always shared that. And then playing too, like we played a little bit. Yeah, the basketball club just I don't know, Lou. I think you might have to be the one to like talk about the origins, because For me, it was just like deciding to play ball in Chinatown after work with like a group of artists, you know.
When we first met, Herb asked me a question. I remember we sat side by side. I forgot where. He said, "Who's your favorite player?" And I said, "Jason King." And then he said, "Oh, that's my favorite player too." And then I thought that was almost like an interview. And then I passed the interview. And then on the second date, he took me to Brooklyn Bridge Park, the pier basketball court. He said, "Let's shoot around." I thought that was another interview. He said, "Oh, this person actually can play basketball." And I was like, "Oh, I passed that interview." Again, later on, I went to actually play with her a couple of times with his original group. And I felt personally intimidated because I used to play when I was in college and high school. When I came to America, there was no basketball community for me at all. So I took a really long break, almost 10, 15 years. And I had a knee issue. So all the injuries and getting back into it, it feels really scary for me to play with the speed, especially like in American, almost like a first time in a basketball game. There were girls and boys mixed gender, but I still feel scared. So then because of that, I think me and Herb just like started discovering if we have artist community that plays basketball together. The origin story for basketball club, it was just five of us. I DM'd one of the player that I discovered on social media, on Instagram, and I saw, oh, he actually posts about basketballs on his Instagram, which is Andrew Liu. That's the sixth member. So then we can play 3-on-3, and that's how the basketball club started. It was just a handful of us, but we all working like a different creative field. And then we started discovering community from there just by playing it every weekend.
When was your first official meetup?
Late 2018, 2019.
Herb, correct me if I'm wrong. The kind of leagues that you belong to before meeting Lou, they weren't Asian American specific, right?
I used to play in a league called the Dream League, which is Asian American run. Brian Yang, actually,
Oh,
who we know. Yeah, he founded Dream League or the New York chapter of it, and that was essentially like an Asian American league, but it was a league, you know, it was like competitive in nature, and it was like seasons. Like Lou said, like the groups that played basketball that I was part of, you know, they all had that vibe, you know, it's like kind of serious and competitive. What we wanted to like, I wouldn't say create even because it wasn't that intentional in the beginning. It was more just like we wanted to play ball with people that we liked and that people who also shared an interest in art, or just because that was like who we were around, and it was kind of fun and funny to see like artists that we know like play ball and kind of struggle on the court and kind of have fun. Before the pandemic, it was kind of irregular. We would just kind of plan according to when we were available or when we felt like it, kind of thing. But then after the pandemic, you know, after New York City put the hoops back up, you know, remember for like a while they had taken the basketball courts down to discourage people gathering, so then they put them back up. And then after that, we decided, just because it felt like everybody was so isolated, we felt isolated, we wanted to play ball again. That was the thing I missed like maybe the most. So we decided to like go back into Chinatown Basketball Club. By then it had a name and an Instagram account. And then we decided to like organize weekly at a set time, a set place, Columbus Park, 10 a.m. Sundays. From there, like, you know, the group that we started with, some of them kind of continued on, and they brought people, you know, every Sunday, because people just knew, oh, Sunday at 10 a.m. there's going to be this group at Columbus Park. And it just kind of kept growing from there because there's like a good vibe, like a good spirit. It wasn't, it's competitive, there was good players, but it wasn't like do or die, you know, and it wasn't like sort of toxic. Instead, it was like people who had a kind of generous spirit or wanted to kind of be welcoming to new people. It was just organic. Some people just kind of passed by and was like, oh, what is this? And joined and played and then stayed and brought other friends. And it's kind of been like that throughout. And, you know, it's been to me like the most beautiful thing, combining like these three things, me and Lou together, collaborating together and sharing like this love of basketball, but also like art. It's a space of creativity too, and like thinking about how to include art in a basketball setting is another way that art has become liberated for me from the conventions I always thought about it, the social conventions, the marketplace, the world of institutions. On the basketball court, art can also exist. We're trying to find different ways that it could be included.
Can you give an example of that?
We decided to do a 3-point shooting contest in 2022 because our friend Hua Shu, he had a book launch, his great book Stay True was coming out, and he asked us kind of out of the blue, hey, he was like, hey, do you guys want to do like a event? Because he was doing something at You and Me Books, was right next to Columbus Park, and he was like, do you guys want to like collaborate on that book launch event? And we're like, yeah, let's do a 3-point shooting contest, and then like you can be there and we can celebrate the book launch. I guess the art making for that, first of all, we painted a poster. We painted like this kind of bracket chart to have people like follow, who was winning and so forth for the 3-point shooting contest. Just the association with that kind of work I thought was really cool. And I think for people who didn't know anything about Hua or the book, or maybe who did know about his book, they were like, this is really random and cool that this, New Yorker writer who's a kind of like public intellectual is part of like Chinatown Basketball Club. Like, what a weird and random thing. And it kind of made sense also because his book, there's an obsessiveness to how to position yourself culturally in the world and how to find yourself through like things you choose to like or choose to like distance yourself from. I think that makes a lot of sense with people in our community. There's also just like weekly, we like announce our runs through Instagram, and we ask like artists in our community to like contribute an artwork, like a poster or a design, a photograph that we kind of highlight every week and feature. And
Or
so,
drawing or painting.
art comes through different channels, big events, sometimes small things, but it's a big part of like I think our identity.
Before we end, can you talk about what your like real dream would be to do together, as a next phase?
Specifically for Chinatown basketball, we talked about, how do we dream for what would happen in the future? And I think that kind of showed what you mentioned about me and Herb's personality too. Herb's very structured and very fluid. So I'm dreaming like what could potentially happen really far away. And then what Herb cares is wanted to maintain the every week run that's very well organized, and then what we are doing, and then make it do it better a little bit. And I really kind of appreciate that part as well while I'm like going dreaming what's could potentially happen. So we had a tournament last year, a pretty ambitious project that Chinatown Basketball organized. And there was a group of committee that worked more than 3-4 months putting this together. It had 16 teams, 48 players participated. Along with the basketball part, there are also a mini CBC mini market that has artist vendors, bookstores, and publishers that was selling products or selling books or selling design objects. And CBC had a design table as well. So we had our merch that was made for this tournament. So that was maybe another add-on example of how we were kind of thinking different ways of combining art and basketball that could coexist and then happening together. And there was some music by Kip Talk. It was really kind of connected everything like architecturally together. Because of a project like that happened, we would consider for this year, how do we do it better? And then what can we include? And because of the tournament happened, there's also a growing community that's happened. More people found out us, and more people want to participate for the tournament as well. So we're kind of working right now to just balance the changes right now. And maybe from what her would want is maintain the same, but I think it also kind of requires a lot of work to maintain the same.
That's very exciting. I think, because Chinatown Basketball Club is essentially, it's a brand that you've successfully established. You have so much room to do so many different types of things.
There's definitely a lot of potential but we really like it, pushing it into like a cultural identity that people feel proud to be part of.
To be part of a basketball tradition in Chinatown and in New York, maybe we have like a stake to a claim on like contributing to basketball legacy is just like incredible to me. I say that very modestly. I think what we've done is really important for us, like me and Lou, and for some of the people that were looking for a community at a certain point and looking for a way to connect like maybe their identity as artists or creative people with their love of basketball, or their cultural identity, finding a place where there are a lot of people like them, in a space that it's like a kind of like welcoming space. I think that's what Chinatown basketball is, and there's been good basketball too. What's really cool to me is that there's this, like you said, there's a potential right now for it to be something more than what it has been, and I kind of like that state. I'm a little bit scared of like getting to a point where we have to like do taxes, or like you said, it's like fundraise with like a lot of pressure, and because that will always change what it was. It's something that we should do. We should think bigger, but I'm also like, I love that there's this kind of excitement for it right now that we don't know what's coming. We don't, and it's up to us to kind of envision that.
I think it's very exciting for both of you. I know you're getting ready to go on a trip. It means so much that you gave up this time to talk. I feel really honored and lucky to call you my friends and to be able to watch the work that you're doing together. Knowing Herb on his own, and then to see how, as a married couple, you're doing all of this great work for community. It's really exciting. I wish you tons of luck, and I'm always a supporter. And thank you for sharing your story and your recollections on all of this.
Thank you, Nancy.
It's such an honor to be part of Quiet Before. We're
Mhm.
huge fans, and like this work is so important because you're documenting people and their stories, people in our creative community that nobody else is doing with this kind of like level of sensitivity.
And dedication too.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Nancy.